And we're facing a future with no baseload capacity, but we need baseload. We need power every hour of the day. And so those were the criteria that we used to invent our system.
Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome back to Earthlings 2.0, the show where we imagine how we could be better versions of ourselves and build a collective future we actually want to live in. Today, we're taking a fresh look at concentrated solar power, also known as CSP. This technology isn't new. In fact, it has origins that go all the way back to ancient Greece and Rome, where people used mirrors to concentrate sunlight and create fire for cooking and heating. In the 1920s, an American engineer, Frank Schumann, built the world's first solar thermal power station in Egypt, and that power station used parabolic troughs to concentrate sunlight and produce steam. As of 2023, there was a total of 8.1 gigawatts of CSP, with the inclusion of 3 new projects that are under construction in China and in Dubai. And the largest CSP plant in the world, the Noor complex in Morocco, has the capacity of 580 megawatts and provides electricity for over 1 million people. So a lot's been going on with CSP over the past few decades, and it's been seen as a very promising solar plus storage type of solution that can address the intermittency of renewables at the megawatt scale. So very promising. However, a lot of these projects have struggled with high costs, technical hurdles, and really complex infrastructure requirements. And personally, I think that it's really the massive scale and size of some of these plants that's contributed to that. So I'm sure I know what you're thinking. There has to be a better way. And our guest today says that the modularity of their CSP solution, as well as a few other factors, gives them an advantage. But before we dive in on this away mission, I'm your host, Lisa Ann Pinkerton. I'm the founder and CEO of the award-winning technology firm Technica Communications and the founder of Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability. Before founding those organizations, I was an environmental science and healthcare reporter for NPR and PBS. And whether this is your first or 50th episode, thank you for joining us today. It is our joy and privilege to bring you these stories, and we really appreciate that you come back every week to hear them. If you want to be more active within our community, there's a couple of ways you can do that. Number one, the next time that you're referencing something you learned on the show, or just talking podcasts in general with your friends, feel free to recommend the Earthlings 2.0 show. You can even send them a link, the show from Apple or Spotify, right to their phone so they have it. And that is the single most effective thing you can do to help us grow our community. If you're already doing that, thank you so much. And if you want to do more, you can write me at lisaann@earthlingspodcast.com and tell me what you like about the show and what you don't. I would love to hear from you because I am my own editor, and sometimes that can be a good thing, sometimes it can be a bad thing. And we love to hear outside perspectives. You can also join our Substack newsletter. You'll get a digest of shows that are coming up. And you can also join our Patreon page. And thank you to Resource Labs for having us on the network. Today's Tech Spotlight is with 247Solar. It's a company that's combining concentrated solar power, thermal energy storage, and a unique turbine that can provide zero-emission electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The CEO is Bruce Anderson, and he's our guest today. And he's been running this company for almost 10 years. And before that, he worked to commercialize MIT innovations with the venture firm Ignite Technology Ventures. We're catching up with him outside of Washington, D.C. in Great Falls, Virginia. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lisa. It's really great to be here. I'm really excited.
I've been watching this industry for a while and wanting it to be even more prominent than it is today. And I think you and I are going to get into some of the reasons why we don't see more of these plants around the world right now. So in some ways, concentrated solar power has struggled. So I'm interested to hear from you. Why don't you think it's scaled up the way wind and PV photovoltaics have?
Well, it really goes back to its origins. I call my grandfather's CSP because it's been around that long. My grandfather didn't, but he could have invented it. But it was invented in order to replace fossil fuels being burned in steam turbines. Steam turbines are the turbines of choice to produce a lot of our electricity, maybe most. And they thought, oh, this is a clever way of solving a problem. Even back then, they were concerned about fossil fuels, climate change, energy, pollution, everything. And so it really wasn't in a sense, a whiteboard approach. It was a problem that needed to be solved. And it was pretty well described. Replace that coal or whatever you're using in a steam plant. So originally, systems were built without storage, just like PV was built originally without batteries. The difference is that PV, even though it's a very sophisticated and complicated product, it really is. I mean, to try to turn sunlight directly into electricity, I mean, that's amazing. And it's very simple, very elegant. I love PV. But the problem with PV is that the sun doesn't shine all the time. And I know it sounds crazy, but people want electricity whenever they want it. They don't wait for the sun to shine. And the fact is that most of all the original CSP plants had no storage. They just operated during the day. Then along came the drop in cost and prices of PV. Along came batteries, and that just disrupted the whole CSP thing because now they needed storage. Well, the storage had to be thermal, storing heat rather than electricity, because that's what CSP does, is produces heat. It converts sunlight into heat first rather than to electricity first, like PV does. So you store heat. Now, the challenge is these big, huge utility scale projects needed a huge storage system for all that heat to be able to operate for these big turbines for, all night. And they found something called salts, molten salts. And a lot of your readers don't realize this, but when you heat salts up to, say, 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, it melts. And also some of your readers know or don't know that when you change the phase of a material from solid to liquid, it's because it's storing up a lot of heat right at that melting point. And so it's able to store a lot of heat in that what's called a phase change. Well, salts have problems. They're mostly environmental, but they're also materials. And what I mean by that is that the containers, these big honking containers that look like big oil containers, that you see these farms of containers, they're storing oil in it. They corrode easily. Molten salt corrodes. I mean, we've all experienced, living near or being near the ocean. Not everybody has, but people who've lived near the ocean know how salt corrodes your car. And it corrodes the heat exchangers that are required and the plumbing and everything else. It's really tough stuff. And the other problem is that if you don't have enough heat, the salt solidifies again. And now you have to pump in heat from who knows where to melt it again, to make it molten. The other challenge with big CSP systems is what you pointed out. They're complicated. They require an army of people to operate them. I mean, steam turbines themselves require an army. They require constant attention. They break down frequently, and even they don't operate all the time. They operate more of the time than PV does, solar panels, but they break down a lot. and they need constant attention by very smart people, by the way, not just people who can dig ditches, but people who are really well trained, pretty smart. And another problem, in addition to their complexity and some of the other challenges, is that they take a long time. You've got to engineer each one. Each one is different from the other one, previous one, and take a long time to get financed, a long time to build, a long time to get all the bugs out. Sometimes you never do, and so they're just a pain in the butt. And being a construction project, the only way they get their costs down is to make them bigger and bigger and bigger.
Which just adds to the complexity.
Exactly, and the time required. But there's really no other serious way of getting the cost down. Now, what we have with PV, photovoltaics, is a thing that the more you make, the lower they cost. Well, it happens to be true of everything. If you make one car, it's going to cost you $1 million. If you make $1 million, now you can afford a car. You can't do that with conventional CSP. So we invented our system with all these awarenesses and concerns in mind. We needed it to be simple. We needed it to have no environmental issues. We needed it to be standardized, which is what a PV cell is. All PV cells are created equal. I mean, some are better than others, but they're made in a factory, and volume brings the cost down. And so when we invented it, we knew that PV wasn't going to cut it. Even with batteries, there are very, very few places on Earth where PV plus batteries will enable you to have electricity uninterrupted every hour of the year. Because eventually you're going to have bad weather. So even if you have enough batteries to get you through the night, which would be very, very expensive, and a huge PV field to charge those batteries during the day, on top of the cost of batteries, if it's cloudy the next day, or rainy, or snowy, or bad weather of some kind, typhoon, you name it, you're not going to have power. And that's where baseload power plants come in. That's why we have coal plants. Coal plants, even though they break down and only operate 60 or 70% of the time every year, they still operate every hour when they are operating. And that's called baseload. And we're facing a future with no baseload capacity. But we need baseload. We need power every hour of the day. And so those were the criteria that we used to invent our system.
You have the advantage of being able to look back on what's been done in the past, what worked, what didn't, and take a different tack to address some of these barriers. So let's get into it. Like, how does your system work? Can you walk us through the various steps, and what does it look like?
Well, we like to say the only reason we call ourselves CSP is because we have to call ourselves something. Because people need labels, right? But it's so different from my grandfather's CSP. First of all, it is modular, like you pointed out, modular, which means that instead of one big system, you have dozens of smaller systems. The advantage is that they're all identical. And so when you're buying a piece of equipment for one, you can buy the same piece for dozens and get a lower price. And with time, as you make more and more of those pieces of equipment, the price drops. And that's what manufacturing does. Everything that's made and manufactured declines in price with volume. And that's the biggest challenge that CSP have. The complexity, the environmental issues, all those things, yes, they're important. But the challenge really is getting their costs down. And with modular systems, you can get the cost down. So that's characteristic number one. They're modular.
And how much power would like a modular solution from yours generate?
Our basic module right now produces 400 kilowatts. Now, what that means is that that's roughly 80 average homes in America.
Hmm.
It's 1,000 homes in Africa.
And you add these together and you can create a larger installation for whatever level of, yeah, for whatever energy that particular site requires.
We are engineering right now a 3 megawatt module. So, if you remember wind turbines, they started small, and now they're in the megawatt class range. And we're doing exactly the same thing, and you do that to get the cost down, but you still maintain that modularity. The second characteristic is that they're really simple. We don't have any molten salts. We don't have any complicated equipment. The only moving parts of our system are blowers and dampers, because we just use air in our system. We heat air, ambient pressure, atmospheric pressure air. Now we do heat it pretty hot, like 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
That's like white hot, not red hot, it's white hot. And so it's really high temperatures. That gives us a greater efficiency, and it also makes it possible for us to store a lot of heat in a small space for a long period of time. And our magic turbine takes that hot air, literally without any combustion, no emissions. It drives the turbine makes electricity with hot air and no combustion. But the other thing about our turbine is that it has a combustor on the outside that heats the air that goes to it during bad weather. And that's how we can operate every hour of the year. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, frankly, that is dirty fuel, like most fuel. But there's also biofuels and hydrogen, and we expect someday that the fuel we use will be clean like all fuel will be. Now, the third characteristic is that we don't have any environmental issues. We don't use molten salt, for example. And instead, we use the blowers to circulate that hot air that I described, to circulate this hot air through a storage container. It's basically a steel tank lined with insulation and filled with small pieces of ceramic. We call them pellets. The air blows through that, heats up the pellets. Pellets store the heat, and then at night we circulate the air through it again to heat the air that goes to the turbines to operate the turbines at night. Those storage containers lose very little heat because they're so well insulated. So, and the other environmental issue that we avoid is we use very little water. Steam turbines use a lot of water. But the problem is, with CSP, the best geographical locations are those where we have a lot of sunshine. And those locations are usually pretty dry.
Yeah, a lot of these pictures of CSP are like these massive installations in the middle of the desert, and it looks very futuristic, like you're on Mars.
Yeah, I hope to see you on Mars, Lisa. At any rate, there's always sunshine on Mars. They don't have any clouds, and so we don't have the water problem. We don't have the molten salt problem, and so in terms of getting through the zoning process, we don't have issues. We don't have environmental issues to slow us down.
Hmm. Well, there
And
might be some siting, environmental siting issues that you'd have to do an environmental survey and these types of things, right? For
oh,
any kind of
sure,
project, right? So you'd still have
yeah,
those, but any
you don't
project
have
is going to
those.
have those. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean,
Hmm.
we don't want to kill any desert tortoises or, you know, have those kinds of issues. Every
Right.
site has those concerns of some kind.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what we do, we take these on the ground in a CSP system. You have something called heliostats, and these are mirrors. They track the sun, and they're computerized, and they're all computerized to coordinate the reflection of the sunlight up on top of a tower. And sitting on top of that tower is something called a solar receiver. And so all this concentrated sunlight heats the air to that high temperature. And then that air is circulated through the system. Some of it goes to the turbines during the day, some of it goes to the storage during the day, and then that storage operates the turbine at night. It's that simple.
So you have these other components, and we've talked about the heliostats, and then you also have your thermal storage system, which is those pellets that you talked about, and heating those up, and those store the heat. And then you have this heat to power turbine, which is different than a steam turbine. So I was wondering if you could go a little bit deeper into how that heat to power turbine works.
Well, these small turbines are a lot like jet engines. And we've all looked at a jet engine when we get on a plane or whatever. We know what they look like. They have these blades that spin around, and on the shaft of these turbines, the same shaft is the generator. These turbines are small enough to be packaged into a shipping container, so they fit on a truck or on a boat. They can be shipped, and when they arrive at the site, they're already operation ready. Doesn't take a lot of fiddling around to, like a steam turbine. Oh my gosh, trying to build it and then debug it and get it operating is a huge process. Here you're talking plug and play.
That was going to be one of my questions, is how much of this is assembled and shipped versus being assembled on site.
Yeah, that's the advantage of these turbines, is they're small enough to be shipped and shipped operation ready. This is really important to us. The less time you have to spend on the site, the cheaper the project.
Hmm.
And the way that works, I'm not going to be able to describe exactly how it works. There's a little secret sauce in it. But basically what we've done is replace the combustor with a high temperature heat exchanger. It really takes a diagram to explain it, so I won't go any further than that. But
Okay.
basically the heat exchanger takes the heat from the hot air, transfers it to the air that goes into the part of the turbine that spins. And that's how it does the job of the heat of the combustor.
Hmm. And to bring all this into focus, you have a commercial demonstration plant that you're building in India. Can you describe this project to us? And so, how large is it going to be? What's the use that it'll have, and how is your technology going to fit in there?
Well, gratefully, Prime Minister Modi is very concerned about the environment, about climate change, and and yet they have a lot of coal, and and they're still an emerging economy, and they need as much baseload power as they can get. They need power every hour of the day, and the demand for that is growing every hour, every day, and so they have to build coal plants. They don't want to, but they're building PV farms and PV panels and rooftop systems as fast as they're building coal plants. But the problem is that when the sun goes down, on come the coal plants. They don't have anything to operate at night. In our country, in the United States, we're blessed that we have a fairly robust grid. A lot of ways of handling power when the sun isn't shining, but India isn't that far along, and so they really need something that operates year round, and around around the clock, and that's us. And so they bought one of our modules, 400 kilowatts, and it's our job to build it and train them to operate it. So it's 400 kilowatts, and that's what it does. It operates from the time the sun goes down until it comes up in the morning.
How much space is required for that system in India? Like how much land? Trying to help people have a sense of scale here.
It's only about 5 acres
Hmm.
per system. Now, they also, what I haven't touched on yet, and we can get into it when you're down the road in this conversation, is that, when engines operate, they not only do what they do, that we all, we know their engine powers the car, you know, engines do some really good things. They produce electricity or whatever, but they also produce heat. They get hot.
Yeah.
And with your car, the only way you can use that heat is to heat your car during the winter. And they produce the cooling in the summer too. But our heat is pretty hot, and our heat is useful for industry. So in India, our heat goes to a building and drives what's called an absorption refrigeration air conditioning unit to make cooling for the building, for an office building. And those are the kind of projects we look for. We look for projects that require both our electricity and our heat 24 hours a day. And those generally are industrial operations. It could be a mine that's processing their ore on site and needs heat, or it could be, let's say, a food processing facility that has a lot of sterilization required. It requires heat to do that. But that combination is something that we can do because we're smaller scale than conventional CSP. And we can be located closer to the facility to be able to deliver our heat directly through pipes to the place where it's needed in the industrial facility.
So that was one of my questions, was what are some of the other types of applications that your solution could provide that standard larger CSP plants can't because they're so massive. So they're just like providing grid energy writ large, right? But it sounds like your solution is modular enough that it can be site specific to service specific operations versus, I mean, it could do the grid too, but it seems like it could be like a little microgrid to supplement grid power specifically for, like you said, industrial plants, but facilities that need heat, right?
Yeah, in fact, that's exactly the case. We Most of the interest that we get comes from the outside, and most of the customers that we proactively solicit have either bad grids where they can't depend on the power, and so it really frustrates their ability to operate efficiently every hour of the year, or they're not connected to the grid at all, and they have a backup. They produce their own power, and typically it's very expensive to produce your own power, and then often the fuel that you use is so expensive you don't want to burn that to process the ore or to provide you hot water for your food processing. And so we can usually be pretty transformative for these kind of facilities, because now they can operate all the time. They get a super high reliability. And we give high reliability because we have multiple modules. If one's broken, for whatever reason. The others are still operating. So they have a level of reliability they never even imagined before. And that means a lot to industrial facilities.
I wondered because you talked about the facilities that need heat. And I wasn't sure if data centers were facilities that utilized industrial heat like other manufacturing applications.
They need air conditioning.
Okay.
All those servers, all that electronic
Yeah.
equipment,
It,
it ends up being what they need to cool everything in a data center requires between 30 and 40% of their total heat load or their total energy load, and the rest is the electricity. So we can provide them the electricity, and we can provide them the heat to drive absorption chilling for their air conditioning and cooling needs. And we can build fast. We can get approved fast. We're clean. We're super reliable. We're everything that data centers are looking for today. And we can keep them off the grid. We don't have to be connected to the grid.
mm-hmm.
And so it spares all the other users of that particular grid from having to bear the costs and the challenges associated with the supplying an enormous amount of electricity to these data centers that are just gobbling them up like crazy.
When you're talking about the manufacturing, I remember back in like 2015, Technico was representing this company called Alveo Technologies, and they did industrial LED lighting. One thing that the CEO was telling me was it's a real pain for some of these industrial facilities to have to stop their assembly lines. For the LED company, it was, oh, the light's gone out, so now we have to stop the assembly line and go up there and change the bulb, right? So that was the advantage of the LED lighting. But now you're talking about how you can basically act as a microgrid, and for facilities with grid service that is pretty unreliable or it goes out like 15 times a day. I can understand how some of these emerging countries, especially in the global south, have really struggled to develop their economies because their grid isn't reliable. So therefore, their manufacturing base really struggles, and it probably is more expensive and slower to produce, all because the grid isn't producing consistent energy for them. And I like what you're saying about how you can have this modular CSP solution that can come in and provide consistent power 24/7 that these facilities need to thrive.
Well, you described their challenges that was really, I don't know if you're just guessing at that problem, but that is a serious problem in emerging economies, serious. And it really stymies their economic development. It's a serious problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why emerging economies absolutely love what we're doing. It's an easy sell to those companies in those countries.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to that, we bring the financing. So they don't even have to pay for the system. We build the system and then sell them the energy.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and because these emerging economies don't have the money,
Mm-hmm.
but they need what we have. And so we bring the financing and sell the energy. And of course, the leaders of the government love it, that we're doing that. So the other thing is that we're committed to prosperity in these emerging economies. That's part of our shtick. I mean, that's what I care about. I love this country, but I don't need to help it. It's doing fine. Emerging economies need what we have, and we're thrilled to be able to provide it. The other thing about our technology, and I wrote something about this recently, is that our equipment can be made in these emerging economies. We're developing a complete supply chain of our equipment in India. And when we build something in southern Africa, a lot of the equipment can be made there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my view is that instead of having these countries depend on fancy equipment from someplace else. They can make our equipment themselves
Hmm.
and create good paying jobs.
Yeah. Local jobs. That distributed manufacturing model I find really interesting, and I've watched a couple of other. There's like a battery company that I know of that was attempting to do that, and some um, prefab housing companies are doing that as well, because it's like you're creating local jobs, and also you're not shipping product across the world on a boat and all of the carbon emissions that come from that. And then there's these second and third order effects that I hadn't even thought about. But when you mentioned um, about the personnel, if there are personnel on the ground locally building these products, that also means that there's expertise local on the ground that can help repair them and improve them. So they're not dependent on you in a different time zone, or you don't have to fly people out to fix something. They've got the expertise there, and you're supporting broader economic growth by by um, training people locally to build and maintain these machines.
Well, how did you know we use local people to build and maintain? Because that's
I'm just
exactly what
deducing.
happens.
That's what I would do. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's simple enough for us to do that. We don't
hmm
need to bring in experts from outside to build and operate these things.
hmm
We use local contractors and we train people to operate it. And we can monitor and operate it even from a distance. But of course, from a distance, we can't do some of the things like, lubricate the blowers and dampers, for example. That
right.
takes local people. Or wash the PV panels and the heliostats and, this kind of thing. That takes local people. But we can train them to do that.
So I want to go back to something I mentioned earlier in the show, which was, concentrated solar power has been around for decades, but it doesn't get as much attention from the media as solar and wind and batteries do. And there's probably all kinds of reasons for this. But do you think that um, there's some misconceptions around CSP that kind of lead it to be like for people that work in this industry, it's like kind of on the side, constantly on the sidelines and not front and center?
They're not misconceptions.
Okay.
I mean, CSP has earned whatever image it has
Hmm.
because because those concerns are real.
Hmm.
But but what people don't know yet is that this modular approach can really address most of those unfortunate conceptions,
Hmm.
and they will change it. That will change the public perception eventually.
What I didn't ask you is like, what's the timeline for that demonstration plant in India? How far along are you right now in building it, and when do you expect it to be finished?
We expect to be operational early next year, but we
Hmm.
also expect to have commercial operation of quite a number of systems by then.
Okay.
Our pipeline is huge. We're starting to actually take orders, and we'll be breaking ground this year on a number of projects all over the world.
So you mentioned that you're financing the building of these projects. So where are you getting your financing from? If you can share specifically or generally, like what's that part? How does that part of the business work?
Yeah, um, we're in the process of interviewing uh, people for an open position of director of project finance.
Hmm.
There is an enormous amount of money all over the world that's specifically targeted for green energy projects like ours, or PV or wind or whatever. But there's a lot of money looking for green projects, and ours are going to be pretty profitable. And so we will attract that funding, and it'll the source of that funding will be determined in large part on the geography of the system, where it's being built, and how large it is, um, the kind of projected returns that we uh, are projecting.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of money out there for this.
So you think the money will more likely come from local participants versus sort of like I'm thinking of like these international private equity firms. Um, what do you think?
Well, there's so much money, like I said, out there looking for these kind of projects. I anticipate that in most cases we'll get some local money, some from banks, even local banks. We'll get some from the local governments. Zimbabwe, for example, they have a terrible grid, unfortunately, just awful. And they're doing everything they can to improve it, but they don't have a lot of money.
Hmm.
But what they can do is, just by way of example, is that they can be a guarantor and reduce the risk to somebody who's providing project financing.
Hmm.
That's an example that even poor governments can offer. But in most cases, there'll be international money coming from who knows where, depending on,
Hmm.
it might be sovereign funds, funds like the World Bank, and there are a lot of European funds that do this, particularly for the emerging economies. Europe has a much stronger connection to these emerging economies than the U.S. does, and a greater commitment because of the colonialism that they imposed on these countries.
Hmm.
And so they're trying to make up for that.
What's the expected lifespan of one of your facilities?
We're expecting them to operate for 40 years.
So much longer than PV. Photovoltaics, I think, are about 25 years roughly. Batteries
Yeah,
around 10 years. Yeah,
that's about
8
right.
to 10.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
So if we look ahead, speaking of like how long something might last, if you're looking like 10, 20 years out, where do you think concentrated solar power is going to be um, and compared to other renewable energy solutions? Like based on what you know from what you're doing with 24/7 solar and what you know about this industry and its proliferation, what do you think we can expect?
I think it's always going to be the young child. I think solar PV and wind and batteries have such momentum. Now, wind is constrained, wind turbines, by where the wind is. PV you can operate, inside your house. You can have a little cell and still do something. Now, maybe not much, but it's not as fussy. But we're very fussy. We need sunshine, and the skies have to be clear. And we've all done this as kids, maybe even as adults. Some of us have taken a mirror and reflected light, and we know that if the sun's really bright, we can get a nice sharp beam reflected. And we know that in a place like Florida, where you have diffused light,
Because it's
you
so
can't.
humid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
You can't get that focus.
Hmm.
It's too diffused. So we have to go where there's lots of sunshine and it's clear skies, and that's not everywhere in the world.
Hmm.
It covers only about 40% of the world's population. So we are limited in locations, just like wind turbines are, but not so much not like PV is.
But there's still plenty of areas in which geothermal is a viable solution and getting more viable with the new technologies that are coming out. So even being constrained geographically isn't as much of a limitation as it might have been even 10 years ago.
That's absolutely right.
Mhm.
Yeah, geothermals. One challenge they have is the same as all steam turbines. They do drive steam turbines, and so they have the problems of steam turbines, which means they break down. And so it's hard for them to guarantee the 24-hour a day, uninterruptible, every day of the year kind of thing that we can do. But still, we love geothermal, and we hope it succeeds wildly.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that they use steam turbines because I'm starting to realize that so many of these new technologies that might be coming out are just really elaborate ways of producing steam.
Yes.
Like nuclear is like that too.
Same thing. Yeah,
yeah. It's just like, um, yeah, extra steps
yeah,
sometimes
and that's their
feels like.
Achilles heel. They use steam
Yeah.
turbines.
hmm Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Bruce. I really
My
appreciate you
pleasure.
taking the time to explain this because it's really fascinating to me how you've taken this really unique approach to concentrated solar power and the specific turbine that you have and everything. So I am going to keep an eye on you as you build out this
Ooh,
demonstration plant. Please keep us posted on how that's going. And we look forward to you finding all the success with that demonstration. Thank you for
thank you.
being on the show.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And in return, I'll just say it's nice to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Thanks. I've been in
Or
this
it,
industry for over 20 years now, so I'd like to
it
think I know a little bit.
well, either or you're good at faking it. And I know you do your homework, so that's
I
probably
do.
explains it. Yeah.
I do. And my ADHD brain can like pull information from various sources and put it all together and look at it from a different angle. That's um that's one of my superpowers, I guess. But yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. And Earthlings, thank you too for joining us today. We'll see you again on another turn of this beautiful blue-green space flower that we call home.